All right, I'm not looking for testimonies, but I am curious, how many of you have ever encountered a demon? Raise your hand. One. Okay. One person. Two. Or 1.5. I don't know. One. Okay. How many of you have watched The Exorcist? That was good. That was good timing. If I was less sanctified in my position on demons, I might say that might have been demonic. So I had you do that because a good number of you said you've watched The Exorcist, or you probably watched something similar to it. And that's the reality of it. As Americans, the majority of our understanding of demons comes from Hollywood, if we're just honest, right? And then somewhat mixing it with the Bible. And we're not really sure where truth starts and where make-believe begins. And so as we go through this tonight, a lot of this is going to be very new to you. We're going to spend 2 whole weeks on demons because the Bible has more to say about demons than almost any other topic if you know where to look. And so we're going to dig into this. So, Ray, what are demons?
Well,
Never mind. According to Easton's Bible Dictionary, demons are spoken of as a spiritual beings, and there's some verses there. Now, notice this is 1893, Easton's Bible Dictionary. So in 1893, this would be the understanding of demons. They're at enmity with God and as having a certain power over humanity. They recognize our Lord as the Son of God, and they belong to the number of those angels that kept not their first estate, unclean spirits, fallen angels, the angels of the devil. They are the principalities and powers against which we must wrestle. And so really, this definition just pulls anything that seems like it's opposed to God and lumps it all together under the classification of demon. But Ray, I'll give you another chance. What does the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible say?
Well, now that I'm ready. So almost 100 years later, Baker defined them as demons are fallen angels, divinely created supernatural beings who, under the leadership of Lucifer or Satan, rebelled against God. Now, again, this has been 100 years in the making, and this would date back even before the first slide that Chris read from. This was a popular view for a long time, right? That demons were just fallen angels. Now, worth noting at this point is that, number one, we never see any mention of this in the New Testament or even in Jewish writings before and after that time. There's really nowhere that we can find this tradition dating back to what we would call original source material. Also worth noting is that when they label Lucifer as Satan, that's actually a holdover which we can't actually find evidence of in the Bible. So the Bible talks about Lucifer, but it does not necessarily label Lucifer as Satan. And so this here is just one of those examples of Christian tradition where people say it and repeat it over and over again. It sounds good, but as we'll see as time goes on, as people get better study methods, it may not be as accurate.
I'm going to clean that up just a little bit.
Sure.
That was really messy. Okay. There's 2 things really to note about this. First of all, nowhere in the New Testament or Old Testament are demons and fallen angels linked, okay? There's never a correlation ever, okay? The second one is the term Lucifer, which we all like to think is the name of Satan. That is a poor translation of the Hebrew Bible into the Latin Vulgate, which is the Roman Catholic official Bible, dating back to about 4th century AD. And they translated morning star into the name Lucifer, Lucifer is Latin for morning star. And so people then attached that Isaiah passage to being Satan, which nobody had done before that either. That was totally new as well. And that's how we came up with the idea that maybe his name is Lucifer. So what I'm saying is that's a terrible translation, according to what the scriptures show, as it will prove out over the course of the next 3 weeks. All right, Ray, try one more time.
So Eerdman's Bible, around the same time, says that a demon is simply a spirit with a minor power. So here they would link demons with any kind of evil or wicked spirit that we see in the Bible, and it's just any kind of spirit with any kind of minor power associated with it.
Okay. Then we have in Harper's Bible Dictionary, they would say it's the English transliteration of a Greek term, daemon, originally referring to any one of numerous vaguely defined spirit beings, either good or bad. And so that's why we use the word demon. It's just a transliteration of the Greek word that sometimes we see there. And then finally, the Lexham Bible Dictionary 2016, daemonion, it's a supernatural being, a spirit, a divine force, a semi-divine being, an evil spirit or malevolent force. It's basically, they're taking that definition by doing a search throughout the entire Bible of the word daemonion and saying this is every single time it shows up, it always has to do with some sort of evil spirit. But you'll notice the absence of any angelic presence, okay? So that begs the question, what are demons? And there are 4 views, all of which were represented in our poll. One is there's the wicked deceased view. Number 2, there's the deceased pre-Adamic race view. 3, the fallen angel view. And the 4th one is the second temple view. And we'll explain all those this evening. Ray, I'll take this one. Will bounce back and forth. Sound good?
All right.
Actually, no, wait. I want to take the last one.
I figured you did.
You take this.
I thought you were being weird. Okay. So view number 1, the spirits of wicked deceased people. So this view would hold that demons are the souls of wicked, unsaved individuals who can roam the earth. They are either under the command of Satan or simply acting under their own evil will. So you think of any view that people have of ghosts, just to attach that with demons, that's basically what you're looking at. This likely originates from the ancient Greeks back all the way in 5th century before Christ, who believed that harmful spirits were deceased people who lived evil lives, also known as a ghost view. So Greeks would hold basically that when someone died a bad death, or if they were evil people, wicked soldiers on a battlefield, they would haunt that area, and anything negative that happened to you was because some evil person died in that area. Ultimately, though, there is no scriptural support for this whatsoever. I don't even think you can really squint to try to find that in the Bible. It's just like Chris said, a Hollywood tradition. And the reality is that instead
Or
of
a Grecian tradition.
or a Grecian tradition, for all of us who are, ties to ancient Greece.
Yeah.
But in terms of how we would answer this, the reality is that unsaved dead are always described as being confined to a specific location in the afterlife. And we've got a few references that we will look at here, understanding that whenever the dead are referenced, there's no idea that they float around or keep existing on the earth post-death. So Luke 16, 22 to 23 said, the poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. So here, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, you see basically Christ saying that when these people died, the good man Lazarus went somewhere with Abraham, and the evil rich man also went somewhere. So there's no idea of them lingering on the earth. Revelation 20:13, and the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. So at the very end of time, when all wicked dead are resurrected, they aren't being drawn from different corners of the earth. They are basically brought up from one location where all dead people go when they pass and are currently now.
So in short, what we're saying is demons are not dead humans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just no scriptural support. We know what happens to the souls of the good dead. We know what happens to the souls of the evil dead. And no hint is there that they linger on as some kind of evil ghost or demon.
Okay. All right, this next one's a doozy, okay? This next one is called the disembodied spirits of a pre-Adamic race. And pre-Adamic means exactly what you think it might mean, pre-Adam. So we would be the Adamic race. And so this view only works if there's a race existed before Adam and Eve, okay? Which might be a new concept for many here. But this is the idea that Satan originally ruled over a pre-Adamic race of people on a perfect earth. When Satan sinned against God, the pre-Adamic people joined him in rebellion. God responded by cursing Satan and somehow forcing his followers to live on as disembodied spirits, which the Bible calls demons. Okay? And so because they were created as physical and spiritual beings, it explains why demons want to possess bodies, right? That is one thing you have to answer is like, why are demons always trying to possess something? possess an idol, possess a human, possess an animal, possess an object. You have to explain that somehow, whatever view we have, because that's the one thing we see them constantly striving to do. And this view is trying to answer that question. The problem is, though, the Bible never hints or even suggests that there is a race of people prior to Adam. Okay, God created the entire universe ex nihilo, out of nothing, and then on the sixth day created humanity, and that would be the first race, unless you count the angels, which seem to have been created several days prior to that. So, now this is a legitimate view held by a lot of people in the world, to be quite honest. It's not the most popular by any means, but this might tip you off. Merrill Unger, in his biblical demonology book, out of Foundations of a Pentecostal Theology, that right there should tip you off. It's going to be a little wonky. A pre-Adamite race is thought of as existing on the original earth, and they would say Genesis 1:1, under the governorship of Satan in his unfallen state, as the anointed cherub that covereth. So they also attach Satan to the Ezekiel 28 figure. This pristine sphere is moreover viewed as the scene of Satan's revolt. And they would pull in Isaiah 14 here, the Lucifer passage we mentioned earlier. And the invasion of sin into the moral universe, resulting in an awful cataclysm which reduced it to chaos. The members of the pre-Adamite race, whom Pember describes as being men in the flesh, were somehow involved in the rebellion, and in the ensuing catastrophe suffered the loss of their material bodies, becoming disembodied spirits or demons. The after-covered fact that demons are continually seizing upon the bodies of men to try to use them as their own is taken as confirmatory evidence that demons are disembodied spirits, and that their intense desire for re-embodiment indicates that the intolerable condition of being unclothed, for which they were not created, is so overpowering that they will even enter the bodies of swine, say Luke 8:32. And so you see how they're trying to show that why do demons want to possess or re-embody people or animals? Okay, and that's what they're trying to do with that. Problem is, though, like I said, there's zero evidence of any of this, and they're just pulling verses out of context to try to support it. And so this is interesting because I almost went into, this is tied into the reptile race. So if you ever heard people talk about reptiles, like, oh, well, so-and-so is a reptile or a snake, they believe that it's a reptile race, which is why Satan shows up as a serpent in Genesis 3, according to this view. Now, you laugh. How many of you know of Scofield's Study Bible? If you have a first edition Schofield Study Bible, this is the view he takes. And he has a study note in there that talks about them being snake people. Okay? I have it.
Should have had that to throw up there.
I thought about it, but yeah. So now he changed his view later on in later versions. Okay? So this is a legitimate view that people have held, and it comes back up every so often.
And what a good example, right? He held a wrong view, saw the biblical evidence otherwise,
Yep.
and changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, view number 3.
Go for it.
All right, the fallen angel view. So this is the one a lot of us are going to be familiar with. Demons are fallen angels who are cast out of heaven because they joined Satan's rebellion sometime before the fall of humanity. This view is often held by those with a Christian tradition view of the supernatural. We've talked a lot in this class about the Christian tradition view. A lot of our understandings of what most, at least American Christians, would hold about the supernatural realm we call the Christian tradition. And this is very much just a part of that, right? This is what you will hear often repeated in churches and books, by one another when we're not really thinking things through and just repeating the thing that we've often heard, but maybe haven't read in the Bible. Now, in terms of what they would say then is that there are spirits that are under Satan's influence. You've got demons in Matthew, you've got unclean spirits that pop up, fallen angels, we see powers, principalities, rulers, things like that in places like Ephesians 12. These are all basically the same thing. These are all just fallen angels with different names attached to them, but every single one of them was made at creation and they fell during Satan's rebellion. And they would say that this fall happened in Revelation chapter 12, which describes Satan falls and that 1/3 of the angels who fell with them. And then we just kind of make that assumption that, Satan has these unclean, or these evil spirits under his command. 1/3 of the angels fell with him. Therefore, they must be the same thing. Worth noting, though, is that angels that did not sin are confirmed in grace and will not fall. Meaning that basically at some point battle lines were drawn, and those angels that stayed obedient to God, who stayed faithful to God, don't seem to be in any true risk of falling in some kind of future event.
Yeah, and this is the view that the Western Church has held for at least the last 500 years. So Roman Catholics hold a lot of this view, Reformed, Protestant, many evangelicals, although it's starting to fall by the wayside for evangelicals. And this is the classic view. Most commentaries you pick up, unless it's been written in the last 10 years, is going to hold this view. Most study Bibles are going to support this view, unless it's written in the last 10 years. Because within the last 10 years, people have started to reject this view for a lot of good reasons, as we'll see.
Yeah. So some scripture that we can look at, though, to maybe try to combat this understanding. Matthew 8:16, that evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. So here it says that demons are the same as these evil spirits, but nowhere does it refer to them as angels or give any hint that these are fallen angels. Next, Matthew 10:1. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. Once again, they had power over these demons, these unclean spirits, but we're not seeing a link to fallen angels yet. Matthew 12:43-45. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself. And they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So it will be with this evil generation. So again, here, as Christ is talking about the nature and actions and behavior of these evil spirits, they possess a person. When they are removed from a person, these spirits wander around, find no place to find home, and say, hey, I'm going to go back to where I was. They come back and they bring a whole house party with them. So here we are again seeing evil spirits, demons, they are in people, they possess people. But again, we're not seeing the link to angels just yet.
Yeah, and I want to add something, because one of the reasons why I have this slide here specifically is to show that the insatiable desire and lust of demons to possess a body. They want to be re-embodied or possess. And here's the problem, though. If you say they're fallen angels, why do fallen angels want to embody somebody? They already have their created body. It's not a physical body, but it's a spiritual body. And nowhere else do you see angels possessing individuals. And so, in fact, actually, you never see an angel possessing a human person throughout the entire scriptures. And so this would be something that is weird and out of the ordinary, and doesn't really have a good answer for why they want to do that.
Now, I think we could say Satan entered Judas.
Perhaps, but that's even up for debate.
But that's about the
we'll
only
see.
place that you could probably make
Yep.
that argument. Now, Matthew 25:41, we actually get into angels. So it says, then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, again, notice, it talks about angels. It's not talking about demons. It's not talking about evil spirits. There's a distinction here that's being made between Satan and his angels and the demons that Christ and his apostles had been casting out. Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces in the heavenly places. And we talked about this last week, right? But the thing to see here is that this is territorial authority language, right? These aren't just individual beings who are out to harass individual humans like we see with spiritual demonic activity. This is talking about how there are whole rulers, there are powers over entire nations. That is what spiritual warfare is really battling against. And that is not what we see when demons and unclean spirits are talked about in the Bible. Those are one-on-one attacks. This is something completely different.
Right. You're trying to tell me that, demons don't rule nations in the daytime, and then their night job is just kind of doing parlor tricks with humans?
It does not seem to be what we see.
Okay. All right. Just making sure.
We could be wrong, right? But we'll work under the assumption no for now.
Okay.
So Chris, do you want to walk me through your chart here then?
I'll walk through the next couple slides here. So here we have eternity past. So this would be where only God exists. And where the line starts would be when creation comes along. And then we have eternity future, right? And so according to this view, God creates the heavens and the earth. including angels. And we see this in Colossians 1:16. We see it in quite a few other places, but I can only put so much information on one slide, right? And then what happens is, according to the fallen angel view, a rebellion occurs sometime before humanity's fall among the angels. Satan and a third of the angelic host rebel and are cast out of heaven. And many would say, hey, this would be Genesis 1:31. If you look up Genesis 1:31, all it says is everything God made is good. It doesn't say anything about angels, demons, or Satan. And then Revelation 12 does talk about Satan, but we'll look at that passage here in a moment. There's no other place, though. There's actually really no place that actually talks about such an event in the Bible. Satan now rules over all demons, unclean spirits, fallen angels, and principalities, whatever you want to call them. That's the idea. And they would say every single spirit being that rebelled happened here before Genesis 3 is the idea. Then in Genesis 3, Satan deceives Eve in the garden, somehow through a serpent. That's not revealed to us in the Bible until you get to Revelation chapter 12, by the way. There's otherwise not in the Bible anyways. So then the idea is throughout history, Satan and his fallen angels oppose God and his people. And that's what Ephesians 6 language is all about. But then there's righteous angels that serve God and his purposes. And it's kind of interesting. It almost sets it out for this duality. Like Satan is another God that's at war with Yahweh. And it sets up dualism in a way, like a cosmic battle of evil and good, the light and the dark, so to speak, the yin and the yang. And then what happens is Satan and his fallen angels are judged and committed to the lake of fire finally in Revelation 20 when Christ comes back, is the idea. And so that's the Christian tradition view. That should all sound very familiar to you. This is probably what you've heard most of your life and you've walked through. Okay? There are plot holes in this, huge plot holes in it, which is why you're seeing people drop this view in droves, because there's no explanation for some of these things, not from the Bible anyways. All right, so, but really, here's the thing. That entire view is totally dependent upon a war in heaven taking place before Genesis 3. Okay? You will not find such a thing anywhere in the Bible. It doesn't exist. The one exception that may be talking about it, and that's the one proof text that people go for this view, is Revelation 12. Does Revelation 12 teach that the spirit beings rebelled before the fall of humanity? Okay? That's what we're going to answer here. So let me show you. In Revelation 12, we have this. And a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains in the agony of giving birth. Now, this is usually where most of us say, I don't get it, we walk away from Revelation. If we made it this far into the text. Identifying the woman symbolizes Israel. As identified by the sun, moon, and 12 stars, which speak to the 12 tribes of Israel. If you go back and read Genesis 3, 7, 9 through 11, you will see Joseph having a dream. And in that dream, his mother and father, who are the sun and the moon, are bowing down to him, and the other stars are bowing down to him, which are his brothers. And so it's symbolizing Israel. The woman is about to bring forth the promised Messiah, the birth of God, the God-man, Jesus Christ. So the woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. Then, let me scroll up a little bit here. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon. Who's the dragon? Yeah, but we don't know that until later on in chapter 12. That's the first time Satan's ever linked to the dragon, by the way. But there is a dragon in the Old Testament, the chaos dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns. So this dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his head, 7 diadems, crowns. Okay? His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. Let's identify the dragon. The dragon is Satan. Revelation 20, verse 2 says, and he seized the dragon, this would be Michael the archangel, by the way, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. Not until Revelation 12 and 20 is Satan, devil, dragon, and serpent ever linked together in the Bible. First time. The heads, horns, and diadems speak to the power of Satan, has amassed over the nations of humankind by deceiving the heavenly beings overseeing these nations. You can go back to Daniel 8:18 through 26 for some cross references, but we won't take the time here in this class. You have it in your notes. So let's keep going. And the dragon, now that we have the players identified, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth. So when she bore her child, he might devour it. What event does that sound like? In the Gospels specifically? Does that sound like when Herod tried to kill all the children, 1 year and younger? She gave birth to a male child. Who's the male child? Okay. And we know that definitively by one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. There's the Isaiah text, one who will rule with a rod of iron. This is Jesus. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Well, what is that speaking of? Well, that's speaking of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, his ascension. And the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. This is to show that Israel is cut off. And right now, according to Paul, we are in the time of the Gentiles, or sometimes what we refer to, or Gentile. Remember, what's Gentile mean, everybody? Nation. So the time of the nations. We're in the time of the nations. And so Christ will come back when the time of the nations is fulfilled, or the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Okay? Where's the war? There's no war there. Okay? The war takes place during Christ's time. The Messiah is born. The serpent seeks to devour him. Herod kills the male children. The serpent also orchestrates the crucifixion of Christ. But Christ is caught up. Resurrection, ascension. Luke 22:69. The woman fleeing into the wilderness is God's protection of Israel until Christ's return. That's what's going on in the context. The context appears in this passage to be referring to the events surrounding the birth, life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. Revelation 12 is trying to recapitulate the Gospels from a spirit realm perspective. Okay? That's what's going on there. And so all the events dealing with a fall of Satan or any kind of fallen angels or fallen sons of God is all taking place during the Messiah here on earth, or his death, burial, and resurrection in that time period. Okay?
And here's the really hard part about the fallen angel view is, if you're going to say that the third of the stars that he swept down with his tail, that was the war in heaven, then you have to realize that if this is telling a coherent story, right, it has a start, it has a middle, it has an end, then you have to fit the woman with the sun and the 12 stars, you have to fit that to something within creation, because you can't say that it's Israel, but then we rewind back to when Satan, corrupted a third of the angels. Then we go back to when the birth of Jesus is coming, right? Because the woman in the stars is clearly talking about this child giving birth to a child who then the dragon is trying to eat. So if you're going to hold to a fallen angel view, you have to make this entire storyline happen before the fall of humanity, or during the fall of humanity. That's the only way that this view can possibly work.
Keep talking, Ray.
Okay. So again, this is one of those, a lot of times, because I grew up with this view, right? And when Chris introduced me to this, the thing that convinced me is that when we identify the dragon and we say the dragon has the crowns and the horns, I'd always been like he said, that's weird. I don't get it. I don't like it. Moving on. It's Revelation. Who cares? But the reality is that it makes perfect sense in this whole view that we've been talking about in this class, right? Because what are crowns? What do they symbolize? Power and authority. But who has crowns? Well, individual kings and rulers. The fact that this dragon is wearing all of these crowns all at once is another point forward towards the divine council view, with the idea that Satan is, in a way, the god of this world. He is controlling, right? He is in league with these angels who have rebelled, who are still over the nations, but are in some way answering or working alongside Satan. Thus, we have a dragon who has all the crowns of all these nations working with these fallen angels.
Here's a preview of session 8 when we finally start talking about Satan. Now, where the war actually, there is a war, but now, which is after the events of 1 through 6, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not demons, angels, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down. And this is the first time Satan is identified with the dragon or the serpent. That great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And so I would tell you that this is when the sons of God, any other fallen angels that choose to follow them, and Satan are finally cast out of heaven. And it's the time when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven in the Gospels. All this correlates together, but we'll tie that all together when we finally get to Satan in session 8. But the main thing to take away from this is really, no. I mean, more and more scholars are showing, however you do interpret it, this all has to do with the events of the Gospels and not something that happens before the fall in Genesis chapter 3. That's an old way of looking at it. It's a Western Christian tradition that is built off Milton's Paradise Lost, more so than anything else. It's not taught in the Bible. So there's no other event in all of Scripture that specifically states that 1/3 of the angels fell. And even if Revelation 12, 1 through 6 is referring to such an event, if you really want to try to fit it in there and twist Scripture to get it to do so before the fall, Revelation is the last book written in the Bible, which means this understanding would not be part of the worldview in the Old Testament or to the apostles. They wouldn't be. Until all the other apostles are dead. John's the only one alive. He writes it. This would be the first time Christians or Jews would ever heard this view if you just use the Scriptures. Unless you want to say it came from extra biblical text. But the problem is the extra biblical text doesn't support this view either. And so there is no way, shape, or form. It is literally impossible that in the mind of the first century Christians and Jews in the Second Temple period, that they would have any understanding that there was a fall of Satan and angels prior to the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3. In fact, outside of the Bible, there's no way they'd even know that the serpent is Satan unless they had extra biblical material, which we'll see in session 8. That's what happened. Oh,
The good one.
the good one. Okay, the good one. So this would be the view of the Jews. This would be the view of many other nations. This would be the view of the apostles and the early church until about 400 AD. This is the Second Temple view of the demons, which is why I call it the Second Temple view, because this would expand from the period from about 300 BC to about 72 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the Second Temple period. And then it lasts beyond that too. This view is the Bible records 3 distinct rebellions by supernatural spirit beings: demons, unclean spirits, rulers, principalities, and fallen angels, including Satan, all result from one of these 3 rebellions. This view adds weight to the divine council worldview, but isn't dependent upon it by any means. It is very important to note that in this view, in no way, shape, or form are demons fallen angels. Okay? Demons do not equal fallen angels in this view. That is a Christian view that is 400 years after the New Testament was written. 3 falls of supernatural spirit beings. And we've already gone through this, so I'm going to kind of in previous sessions. There's the fall in Genesis 3. This was Satan's first act of disobedience. He's not cast out of heaven. That's very important to note, because guess what? He's in the throne room of God talking about Job, 1,500 years after Genesis 3. The sons of God in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, which really relates to our topic tonight. Spirit beings called the sons of God rebelled against God by impregnating human women. The children born to them are called Nephilim. When the Nephilim die, their disembodied spirits must wander the earth. Demons, unclean spirits, and evil spirits in the New Testament are the spirits of these human-angel hybrids. The angels who rebelled are currently kept in chains of gloomy darkness. And Peter and Jude both reference this event, 2 Peter 2, 4, and Jude 6. And so here's the text, the infamous Genesis 6:1-4 text. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. So they're looking at human women and saying they look pretty good, right? Husbands, say amen. Not your wives, right? And they took as their wives any they chose. Then Yahweh said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So not a lot of details there. But next week, we will trace Nephilim throughout from Genesis 6 through Genesis, through Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, Joshua, 1st, 2nd Samuel, and Kings. And we will show how the Nephilim survive all the way through that, which is all new material if you took Angelology the first time. So the third one is Babel, which we've talked about already. That's when the languages were confused at Babel. God assigned a spirit being to oversee each of the nations he had disinherited with Abraham and future Israel, being set aside for God. God tasked them to guide their assigned nations in righteousness and proper worship. However, Psalm 82 reveals that they had rejected God's command and likely continued to lead their nations in rebellion. These are the rulers and principalities referred to in Ephesians 6. The Bible does have an answer for all the different languages for what we would refer to as the forces of darkness, okay? And they're different things. To say demon is all these things is to not take the Bible seriously, in my opinion, because the Bible does not link them together, and they are traceable through the Old and New Testament, especially when you add in Second Temple literature, and you start to see how the Jews and the Christians of that time period understood these things. And so here is, just as a reminder, Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. And then Psalm 82 is a reminder, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds his judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? To fast forward, they have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. That's what they did to the humans that were assigned to them in the nations. I said you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any princes. So God is going to judge these individuals. That's why they're grouped in with Satan. But demons are something different. Demons are not angels. In fact, we looked at a passage just last week where we talked about idolatry, where it says, and demons that were not gods. It's clearly showing that they are not angelic beings. And so what is a better timeline according to the Old Testament? Well, eternity past, eternity future, God creates the heavens and the earth, including angels. Nothing's changed there. But what happens here is Satan's rebellion in the Garden of Eden when he deceived Eve. Okay, that's what's going on here. And if you really, really want to kind of shoehorn Satan into the Isaiah and Ezekiel passage, you would say it's talking about that in some capacity, but we'll talk about that in session 8 more. Angels and humans produce demons, unclean spirits. So here's what happens. Here's the idea. You have a human, you have an angel that takes on the form of a human. The human goes into the woman, knows her, to use the biblical language, a child is produced. Is it human? Is it angel? No, it's a hybrid. So, right? And so bad things happen. So it's not 100% human, it's not 100% angel. It doesn't, when it dies, it doesn't belong in Sheol, and it doesn't belong in heaven. And so this spirit, this body is now here in this realm, and because it was once embodied, now it wants to be re-embodied because it remembers. How many of you enjoy being alive? Right? You go outside, and if it's a nice day, you enjoy the breeze and the sun, right? You enjoy the embrace, the hug of a loved one, okay? Even the vices, right? They would have missed, drinking, drugs,
Eating
promiscuity. Save that for later.
Okay.
Right? And so they want to be embodied to experience those things. And they have so much to offer humans who are willing to be a host because they've been around for so long and they have knowledge and they can tell you about things. And they can even pose as a loved one and say, oh, yeah, I'm your spouse. I'm your mother, father, child, because they would have known and been around and they can mimic. And they will manipulate and they will twist in order to enjoy the pleasures of having a body, and you get something in return. That's what demon possession is all about. So
I think to further add weight to that, because that may sound new and weird to a lot of you, but if you really think about it from the Christian perspective, right? So we are human beings made body and soul. When we die, our souls will go to heaven, our bodies will be on the ground. Do we stay in heaven as spirits forever, though? No, Christ will give us new glorified bodies. Why? Because as human beings, we are made to be both flesh and spirit. And so we're going to, we're going to be, joyful in heaven. I mean, there's going to be no, sadness or anything like that, but we are made to be in physical bodies. That is when we are most complete. And so the Nephilim are the exact same way. They need to exist in the way that they were designed, corrupted, however you want to say it, to exist. They need their spirits in a physical body, just as we as human beings do.
yeah. And to add even weight to that, in Revelation 20, did you know even unbelievers are given a new resurrected body just so it can be turned around and cast into the lake of fire? Humans are designed to have physical bodies. And so because there's some weird hybrid, they have those same desires and urges that we do. Then God judges with a flood because this is an abomination, right? According to God. The nations are then divided at Babel and disinherited to the sons of God. That's the next event. Humanity, just because of our sin, because of our wickedness, we crave something that is not God. We will take our desires, and if a spirit being is willing to give us something that we think we can that will deliver our desire, we will go and we will worship, we will serve, we will barter, we will practice divination, sorcery, necromancy, whatever we got to do, all the things that the Israelites fell into because we are sinful. Then the war in heaven, Satan and those loyal to him are cast out in Revelation 12, happens during the time of Christ. Okay? And then finally, in the church age, they are defeated, but Christ has not come back to actually take over the nations. And so they're roaming around. That's why I don't care who you vote into office. I don't care if it's your Lord and Savior, Donald Trump. I don't care if it's your Lord and Savior, Joe Biden. Whatever you want to put it. Whatever. I use that because we often think if I just get the right person in office, things are going to be good. I'm going to tell you, there is no nation that will ever be good. They are all an abomination to God, and Christ is coming back to destroy them all and to reclaim the nation. We will not have a sufficient one world nation where everyone sings Kumbaya until Christ comes back. But when he comes back, there'll be a lot of death and destruction to make it happen.
And then the Kumbaya with the guitar.
Then the Kumbaya for 1,000 years until Satan's released, and then he deceives everyone again, and there's another destruction,
and then the real Kumbaya.
And then the real Kumbaya.
Finally, everything's done getting messed up.
Oh, it's exhausting. I'm glad I don't have to handle it all. Michael Heiser says in The Unseen Realm, the New Testament is silent on the origin of demons. There is no passage that describes a primeval rebellion before Eden where angels fell from grace and become demons. The origin of demons in Jewish texts outside the Bible, such as 1 Enoch, is attributed to the events of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. When a Nephilim was killed in these texts, its disembodied spirit was considered a demon. These demons then roam the earth to harass humans. The New Testament does not explicitly embrace this belief, though there are traces of the notion such as demon possession of humans, implying the effort to be re-embodied. And what it's talking about, there are traces all over the place that this is the view. There's no view that comes right out and says, if you're looking for a verse that says demons are, and then insert whatever you want there, it doesn't exist. But almost every single doctrine in the Bible is that way, other than maybe the gospel of Christ. And so you have to mine the text and see what is the understanding. And that's what we're doing the rest of this evening and next week. In Rethinking Genesis, Which, by the way, this would not be a conservative theologian. I would go read his book. And so this is somebody who is re-looking at the Genesis text and taking it literally as an actual valid reality of the origin of humanity, which typically they would say it's all hogwash. So this is somebody who's not a believer engaging the text in an honest way. And they say this brings us to the third explanation, that the sons of God are spirits or angels, okay? And so if you have ever heard this view that, oh, the sons of God are just the godly line of Seth, okay? That's a hogwash view. I mean, it just really is. It falls apart all over the place. It is so bad, I don't even spend time on it in this class, but I'll probably do a video on it in the next week, okay? It just has plot hole after plot hole and loose end after loose end. But what I'm saying is, that is another view that people try to say, but what he's saying, just an honest unbeliever's view in trying to read the text, the only explanation is those are sons of God or spirits or angels. Ancient Israelites and their Near Eastern contemporaries would have viewed them as less important and powerful than the Most High God. So even he's recognizing this. They're not God, they're not Yahweh, but they are spirit beings. These creatures are mentioned in various places in the Old Testament. They are members of the divine council, who in Job 1:6 and 2:1 report back to the Lord what is happening in the earthly realm. In Psalms, they are summoned to worship the Lord. Worship him, all you gods. Psalm 97, 95, 96. This understanding is found in the Jewish writings of pre-Christian era, in the New Testament, 2 Peter, Jude, and in the early church fathers, that is, Christian writers of the first 3 centuries. Most modern commentators have therefore come to accept this interpretation of the phrase because it's the only valid literal interpretation that the Bible presents. So, to wrap up this section, and then we'll take a quick break. The wicked deceased view started back with the Greeks in about 5th century BC, was around for a while, and there's still people who hold this view. This is in your notes, sorry. This is just a quick recap. And there's still people today who hold that, they're dead humans that are what demons are. The pre-Adamic race doesn't come on the scene till about 7th century. There seems to be some Christians started holding it, but it was a popular Muslim view as well, believe it or not. And I don't think that's valid at all. But there's still people who hold that today. I mean, there's still people who say things like Nancy Pelosi is part of the lizard race. You see it on Twitter and Facebook all the time. I don't get it. I don't get it. Fallen angels view didn't. Some Christians came up with it because they basically said we're turning away from some of the more supernatural views, and that was about 4th, 5th century AD. That's the first time the fallen angel view was ever on the scene. Okay, you won't find it prior to that. And then the Second Temple view seems to be the view that has always been held. Was popular during the Second Temple period, but once somebody offered the fallen angel view, the Western church at least just grabbed a hold of it, and it was predominant for about 1,500 years, but now it's dying out. And so the Second Temple view is coming back into popularity. Do demons come from the Nephilim? That's really the question we have here. And so because you could have Genesis 6:1-4 and still say that the sons of God impregnate women and have Nephilim and say that demons don't originate from there. So now we have the burden of proof to show that, yes, demons actually are the evil spirits or the dead spirits of the Nephilim and some of the other races that branch off from the Nephilim later on. And so I'm going to introduce to you, I actually have a slide, don't I? I need to switch over to that.
That's the whole thing we were talking about.
Thanks, Ray.
I specifically said switch to your slide. It is on the tape.
I think you did. All right. Now I know what you mean by that. So in Genesis 6:1-4, I just kind of want to walk through this a little bit for us, a little bit deeper. And by the way, I preached a sermon on this back in August or July. If you want to go look at the sermon archives, I think I even go deeper than we do in class in that a little bit in certain places. But when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them. So humanity is multiplying. It's specifically focusing on the daughters. And now it brings in this other group, the sons of God. The sons of God is a term that's used in these places: Deuteronomy 32:8, Job 1:6, Job 2:1, Job 38:7, Daniel 3:25. In every other place the sons of God language is used, it's always referring to a spirit being. So if you want to insist that this one is not a spirit being, then you're saying it's unique from all the other ones, and you're going to have to come up with a reason why. Okay? So the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. I mean, you see my wife? I mean, she's pretty good. Anyways. And they took as their wives any they chose. I mean, come on. What human guy stands a chance against a perfect angelic being, right? I mean, yes. I mean, think about it. That'd be like Ray trying to win his wife from Henry Cavill or something like that.
Based on last week, it'd be like me trying to win my wife from a green-bodied, big-eyed.
True, but they took on human form for this, yes. So, anyways, moving on. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Whatever Genesis 6, 1 through 2 means, it caused God to act by declaring he would destroy all of mankind in 120 years in the flood. I know oftentimes you've probably heard this talking about, oh, man won't live past 120 years, but the genealogical record just does not support that after the flood. There's still people who are living for 100, 200, 300 years for a period of time. But it does seem, the math does make sense to show that from this time period, if you do the genealogy math, that's when the flood comes, it's 120 years. So it does line up better with that. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Did you notice that? They're on the earth in those days and after the flood. That's what next week's all about. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. The Nephilim are described here as the children that were born to the sons of God and the daughters of man. That's what's going on here. That's how he's defining it. Nephilim is the Hebrew word either giants or semi-divine beings who appeared during the pre-flood era and prior to the conquest period in Numbers 13:33. Okay? So they do appear later in Scripture in multiple places.
Were they giants then?
Were they giants?
Were they giants? That's a great question. We will look at that next week.
Although it is noteworthy to say, though, that it says that these specific things called Nephilim were the result of sons of God and daughters of men. So Chris talked about the whole, the Sethite view. You have to really explain how obedient people to God mated with disobedient people to God, and somehow that created something worth calling Nephilim, right? Giving them a very special title that the Israelites would have known as something of men of renown, as it's called, right? It doesn't make sense with just normal humans who are either obedient or disobedient mating.
I agree. And so we're going to ignore this for right now because I have much more detail on this next week. But the things to note here, though, is where this Nephilim show up again. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. If that answers your question. So the Israelites seem like grasshoppers compared to these individuals. And this is after the flood. This is when they're trying to conquer Bashan and Canaan. Then we see in another place, Deuteronomy 2:10-11, the Amim formerly lived there, a people great and many and as tall as the Anakim. Anak was the leader of the Anakim, so you should link those together. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Amim. And so you have this issue. This is why all these weird words in the Old Testament that you just kind of, get glossed over and then fall asleep reading the Old Testament, they're actually mean things and they're important. They're linking these people groups together. The Rephaim show up again in Deuteronomy 2:20. It is also counted as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites call them Zamzummim. And so they have all these different names for these individuals. Basically, these different nations, these different people groups are seeing there's something really weird about these people, and they're coming up with all their own names for it. And what Moses is doing as he's writing in Deuteronomy, and then Joshua later on, they're pulling all the names together and trying to show the links of where they come from. We're going to walk through genealogies next week. Yeah, no one's coming back now, are you? But it's going to be the most fascinating genealogy walk you've ever walked through next week when I show you the line of Noah and how we get to Nephilim again. And so the idea, though, here is Nephilim, Rephaim, Amim, Anakim, Zamzumin, there's Amim. They're all referencing the same giants, these groups of individuals, okay? That specifically in this time period are all located to the west of the Jordan River, known as Bashan, and to the west of the Jordan River, known as the land of Canaan, okay? Which, if I don't know how much you guys know about the Old Testament conquest, that's exactly the place where Israel came in and wiped out people groups, okay? We'll link that more next week. Absolutely, go for it. It's for next week. Just kidding.
Of the fallen angels that are mentioned in 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6. When does that happen next week?
That would happen prior to the flood. You're talking about, go ahead, Roy.
Well, so the question asked is the fallen angels that are in chains of gloomy darkness in 2 Peter and in Jude. When does that take place in this timeline?
Yeah, we have to repeat the question because I have a YouTube following now and people watching, and they can't hear you back there. So the idea is the only place we get the chains of gloomy darkness, that is from Enoch, the Book of Giants, and Jubilees. But that is exactly what Jude and Peter are quoting from directly, are those books. And so that seems to be the link, and that would happen prior to the flood. And we'll look at that text here in just a moment, where that idea comes from. It's a great question. What am I on here? Okay, there we go. So Rephaim is a weird word. Oops. There we go. It's totally messed up here. Sorry. Rephaim, starting over. Take two. A Hebrew word often simply transliterated in modern English Bible versions, at least like in the ESV and LEB. When the term is translated, it's sometimes rendered giants. Sometimes it's rendered shades. Sometimes, like a shade would be like a spirit of the dead. Sometimes it's referencing the dead. These translation choices point to the interpretive problem associated with the term. It is difficult to identify whether the Rephaim were humans, living or dead, quasi-divine figures, or disembodied spirits. And I think the reason why it's so hard is because it's all of them, depending on the time frame that the biblical authors are talking about. Because there comes a point in time when they start talking about them as shade or the dead, they've all been destroyed. And so they are all dead. So it makes sense to talk about them using dead language. And other times it's talking about them because they're alive and it's actually being rendered as giants. So whatever it is, whether it's giants, evil spirits, whatever the case is, there is something really messed up with this people group.
That's the hard thing that translators face. And we're going to see it here, how they've taken the same word of Rephaim, but they can't just come up with a confusing word or a confusing term and say, well, we'll just leave it as is. They could, and they probably should. But what they instead choose to do is to make it easier for us to read is they try to say, okay, here is the word in Hebrew. What would the original audience have understood this to be? And so based on the context, they try to say, well, in this time, maybe they're talking about giants. In this case, maybe they're talking about shades. In this case, maybe they're just talking about dead people. And so they try to say, okay, Rephaim is a word that seems to mean very different things, and so they translate it differently. But as we're going to see, ultimately, the better choice is really to leave it as Rephaim because it means all of them at the same time.
Yeah. So here it is, like in Chronicles, and it's talking about one who was of the descendants of the giants, and the Philistines were subdued. And so it's talking about these individuals, and their war arose with the Philistines at Gezer. Then Sibbecai, the Hushites, struck down Sappai. Sappai is called a giant, at least in the English translation, but it should actually say a descendant of the Rephaim. And he seems to be tied in with Goliath and some of the other individuals there. And Isaiah would have wrote long after all the Nephilim and their descendants were long dead. They are dead. They will not live. They are shades. They will not arise. So it should say they are dead. They will not live. They are Rephaim. They will not arise. To that end, you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all the remembrance of them. And so Isaiah seems to be talking about them, that they are long past. They are dead. They have been destroyed. Job 26, Job even references them. The Rephaim tremble under the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. And so it does make it very difficult for this word. And then Proverbs, one who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the dead, or rest in the assembly of the Rephaim, right? And so this makes an interesting case because in Jewish understanding, in Jewish history, the region of Bashan is kind of known as the birthplace and the place where the most demonic activity happens. In fact, actually, when Jesus goes into finding the demon legion, for we are many, in was it Mark chapter 4 or something like that? Mark 5, thank you. He is actually leaving what is modern or Israel at that time and going into Bashan, and that's where this individual is at. And so that makes interesting. One who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the demons. Might be one way you might be able to translate this, perhaps, if you really. But I like to just translate things the way they are, so I would translate it Rephaim. So, okay, we are in your next thing in your notes. We are not going to read all that. We're going to do the highlights. You can then read on your own at home. But I have the text from Enoch that deals with this, and I have the text of Jubilees, which will answer some questions. The things we're looking at directly reflect the worldview and the quotations of the New Testament writers, including what Jesus quotes from. So when they say things like Satan and his angels, or they say things about demons, or the angels cast in gloomy darkness, they're pulling it all from these texts, nowhere in the Old Testament. Okay, and so here we go. Hopefully you can read this, or you can see in your notes. When the sons of men multiplied in those days, beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. What's that sound like? Genesis 6, 1 through 4. And the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget children for ourselves. That was their end goal, is they wanted to have their own offspring, their own children. They saw humanity doing this. They saw God create humanity, and they said, hey, maybe we can do the same thing. But they get a little nervous about it, and they think that God won't be happy about this. So then they all swore together and bound one another with a curse. And they were, as of them, 200 who descended in the days of Jared onto the peak of Mount Hermon. And they called the mountain Hermon because they swore and bound one another with a curse on it. Who's Jared?
Father of Enoch.
Hey, someone was paying attention this morning. Good job.
Father of Enoch, for those that missed it.
The watchers came down in the days of Jared before Enoch was born for good purposes. God wanted them to guide and help humanity. Okay, and they did for a period of time, according to these texts. The deed and the results. These and all others with them took for themselves wives from among them, such as they chose, and they began to go into them and to defile themselves through them and to teach them sorcery and charms and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. And they conceived from them and bore to them great giants. And the giants begot Nephilim, and the Nephilim were born Eliud. No one knows what that means. That's why it's in those little weird brackets there. And they were growing in accordance with their greatness. They were devouring the labor of all the sons of men, and men were not able to supply them. So in other words, they were not able to produce enough food. Because remember back then, what was the diet that everybody ate? Did people eat steak? No. God did not allow the eating of animals until after the flood. They were all vegetarians and whatever you call somebody who just eats fruit. And the giants, because they did not have enough, began to kill men and to devour them. They began to eat humanity. And they began to sin against the birds and the beasts and the creeping things and the fish and to devour one another's flesh. So they started eating animals too, and that was not allowed. And they drank the blood. Then the earth brought accusation against the lawless ones. And that's a reference to the same thing. When Abel's blood was spilled on the earth cried out to God. And that's what that's implying.
And so when you are reading that Genesis 6 account, it talks about how the world was just filled with violence. It's not just like people were really mean to each other or getting into a lot of fights over territory. It was bad. There was a violence completely unheard of before then or since then. That is just how bad this picture was. This is the worldview that the Old Testament writers had as they talked about this stuff.
Yeah, it won't be this bad in humanity ever again until the day of the Lord, which would be the 7-year tribulation. And that's why the New Testament writers compared the days of Noah to the days of the great tribulation where the wrath of God is poured out. Then we continue on here, and there was much godlessness on the earth, and they made their ways desolate. So it's really bad. Then Michael and Sariah and Raphael and Gabriel looked down from the sanctuary of heaven upon the earth and saw much bloodshed on the earth, and all the earth was filled with godlessness, and violence had befallen it. And so we're going to keep going on. Oops. And they go and they tell God about it. God already knows about it, obviously. He knows all things. But they have gone to the daughters of men of earth, and they have lain with them and have defiled themselves with the women. And they have revealed to them all sins and have taught them to make hate-inducing charms. And now look, the daughters of men have borne sons from them, giants, half-breeds, is what they call them. The commissioning of the 4 archangels. Then the Most High declared. Now you know why demons called Jesus the Most High, is because that's Enochian language. Then the Most High declared, and the great Holy One spoke, and he sent Sariel to the son of Lamech, saying, go to Noah and say to him in my name, hide yourself, and reveal to him that the end is coming, that the whole earth will perish, and tell him that a deluge is about to come on the whole earth and destroy everything on the earth. Teach the righteous one what he should do, the sons of Lamech, how he must preserve himself alive and escape forever. From him a plant will be planted, and his seed will endure all the generations of eternity. It's the plan for Noah to repopulate the earth. Then Raphael, he said, go, Raphael, and bind Azael hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the wilderness, that is, Duedel. Throw him there, and lay beneath him sharp and jagged stones, and cover him with darkness, and let him dwell there for an exceedingly long time. Cover up his face and let him not see the light. And on the day of the great judgment, he will be led away. This is now, the great judgment isn't the flood. The great judgment is still future for us. That's the day of the Lord, Christ's return. He will be away to the burning conflagration and heal the earth, which the watchers have desolated. Okay? And to Gabriel, he said, go, Gabriel, to the bastards, to the half-breeds, to the sons of miscegenation, and destroy the sons of the watchers from among the sons of men. Send them against one another in a war of destruction. Length of days they will not have. And then Michael is commissioned to imprison the other watchers, and they go through to all the giants, the Nephilim, and the archangels go and just slaughter them all to the ground. They just kill them all, according to the Enochian text. And then, the origin of evil spirits. This is later on in Enoch 15. This is them talking about, you were holy ones and spirits living forever. Speaking of the watchers that did this deed. With the blood of women you have defiled yourselves, and with the blood of flesh you have begotten, and with the blood of men you have lusted, and you have done as they do, flesh and blood, who die and perish. Therefore I gave them women, that they might cast seed into them, and thus beget children by them, that nothing fail them on the earth. But you originally existed as spirits, living forever, and not dying for all the generations of eternity. So this is God judging them, saying, you have done something that is an abomination. This is not right. This is not how they were designed and created for. Therefore I did not make women among you. See, no female angels. The spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. But now the giants who were begotten by the spirits in the flesh, they will call them evil spirits on the earth. That's where the New Testament language gets evil spirits, unclean spirits. It's from the Enochian language. For their dwelling will be on the earth. The spirits that have gone forth from the body of their flesh are evil spirits. For from humans they came into being, and from the holy watchers was the origin of their creation. Evil spirits they will be on the earth, and evil spirits they will be called. The spirits of heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. But the spirits begotten on the earth is their dwelling. A little bit more here. And the spirits of the giants do violence, make desolate, and attack and wrestle and hurl upon the earth. They cause illnesses. Does that sound like New Testament demons? It does. They eat nothing, but abstain from food and are thirsty and smite. In other words, they don't have a body, so they can't eat, they can't drink, they can't enjoy the pleasures of humanity. These spirits will rise up against the sons of men and against the women, for they have come forth from them. And that's why they're a plague on humanity. That's the Enochian. Remember, this is not canonical scripture. This is extra biblical, but it was the worldview, and it was a book that was frequently in circulation and used amongst the Second Temple Jews, including the apostles, because they quote from it. Okay, now, real quick, Jubilees covers the same story, but more from Enoch's perspective. The Watchers arrived during Enoch's father time. Enoch is the first of humanity to learn how to write, taught to him by the Watchers. God takes Enoch after a period of time. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch testifies against the Watchers. That's why God takes him. He laid witness to their acts, and he testifies against them in the courtroom of God. God punishes the Watchers and their offspring. Regarding their children, they went out from the presence of order to strike them with the sword and to remove them from beneath the sky. Now their fathers were watching, but afterwards they were tied in the depths of the earth until the great day of judgment, when there will be condemnation on all who have corrupted their ways and their, it's on the next page, and their actions before the Lord. So in other words, what happened is the Watchers, those 200 individuals, were bound and then made to watch as their children were destroyed for their sins and what they had done. Then we fast forward a little bit after the flood. Jubilees covers the life of Noah and his sons. And I just lost my thing. I think it died. But anyways, here we are. Demons plague Noah and his children. During the third week of this Jubilee, impure demons began to mislead Noah's grandchildren and to make them act foolishly and destroy them. Then Noah's sons came to their father Noah and told him about the demons who were misleading, blinding, and killing his grandchildren. Well, Noah, being a good grandfather, says to God, "Now you know your Watchers, the fathers of these spirits, have acted during my lifetime. As for these spirits who have remained alive, shut them up and hold them captive in the place of judgment." I mean, again and again with the place of judgment where they're being held. Then our God told us to imprison each one. Now, this language, then our God told us to imprison each one, Jubilees is from the point of view of an angel, the angel of presence, or talking to Moses. And that's why he kind of writes in the first person. Now, how does Satan and demons get linked together? Okay? This is the only passage that you can find that links them together. The notion that in the New Testament, where they say Beelzebub is the prince of demons, in fact, it doesn't even say Satan there, is this text right here. It's not in the Old Testament, but this is the text. This is where they would have got this idea from. So let's read this. And he's called Mastema here. When Mastema, the leader of the spirits, came, he said, "Lord Creator, leave some of them before me," because he's going to imprison all the demons. God's going to imprison all the demons. Mastema comes and says, "Can I have some, please? Let them listen to me and do everything that I tell them. Because if none of them are left for me, I shall not be able to exercise authority of my will among humanity. For they are meant for the purposes of destroying and misleading before my punishment, because the evil of humanity is great." Then he said that a tenth of them should be left before him, while he would make 9 parts to send into the place of judgment. So he's basically saying, God, can I have a tenth of them? You take the other 90%, and you can go and you can imprison them. He told one of us that there should teach Noah all their medicines, because he knew that they would neither conduct themselves properly or contend fairly. And so this is that angel of the presence saying, basically, God knows that this isn't going to end up for being good. And so he actually has the angel of presence and some of the others who are still loyal sons of God go and teach humanity good things to counteract what these demons are going to do under the leadership of Mastema. We acted in accordance with his entire command. All of the evil ones who were depraved, we imprisoned in the place of judgment, while we left a tenth of them to exercise power on the earth before the Satan. So Mastema is linked to Satan in this passage. And actually, Satan is not a proper name. It's actually an adjective. And that's why it says the Satan, or the accuser, or the opposer, which is what Mastema is. So this would be the origin of how demons get linked to the Satan. We told Noah all the medicines for their diseases with their deception so that he could cure them by means of earth's plants. Noah wrote down in a book everything, just as we had taught him regarding all the kinds of medicine, and the evil spirits were stopped from pursuing Noah's children. He gave all the books that he had written to his oldest son Shem because he loved them much more than all his sons. This is the stories that the Second Temple Jews would have known and learned from being early children all the way into adulthood. This is the backdrop and the understanding of the New Testament language regarding evil spirits, unclean spirits, and demons in the New Testament. Because you will not find the things that they talk about in the New Testament in the Old Testament. It just doesn't exist. But it does in Second Temple literature.
That's the hard thing about reading the Bible, especially the New Testament, is if you gave it to someone who had no background in American Christianity or evangelicalism or any of this, if you had someone who could read English but had never been exposed to any of this, you give them the New Testament, you give them the Old Testament, have them read it all and say, hey, where did all these demons come from? What is up with this Satan figure? How are they connected? They couldn't tell you, right? And that's what we're getting at here is, again, this is not divinely inspired scripture, but this fills in those gaps that we just make assumptions on because we want to explain the New Testament. We want to explain what demons are doing, how they do it, what Satan's up to, where he gets his power. But ultimately, we struggle because we ignore this context that these writers had and understood, so that when they're talking about evil spirits, well, they don't explain it because everyone knows what evil spirits are. Evil spirits are the spirits of these dead Nephilim. They don't need explanation because all the writers are going to know. John.
When was this book excluded from the canon, though?
So when was
Canon for a period of time, right?
yeah? So when was First Enoch excluded from the canon?
Well, it just was. Here's the thing: you have different groups of Christians coming up with their own canons. So there's an Eastern Orthodox canon, there's a Western Church canon, there's an Ethiopian canon, and a Coptic canon. The Book of Jubilees is included in the Eastern Orthodox, the Coptic, and the Ethiopian canons, but it was excluded from the Western canon, which is what we follow because we're of the Western tradition. So basically Roman Catholicism, because all of us here, our heritage is Roman Catholicism because Protestantism breaks off from Roman Catholicism.
So I think on top of that, we could also say that the Jews did not like this once Christ came on the scene, because if you read all of First Enoch, it gives the Son of Man divine eternal existence. And so in the New Testament, when they're talking about the Son of Man, and it's this callback to Enochian and Jubilees language, well, that's a huge problem for the Jews because they want to deny the divine nature of Jesus Christ. And so this is a nail in the coffin for them that proves to them that Jesus was the Son of Man that had been referenced. So they maybe kind of edged it out a little bit over time as it became more uncomfortable for them. And then as we have adopted their Old Testament canon, our basic requirements were, hey, whatever the Jews use, we're going to use for our Old Testament.
Basically.
But since they stopped using this, we don't use it.
Yeah. So, and that's a good answer. There were many people who tried to get it included in the Western canon. There's no way we should include it today because the text hasn't been well preserved. There are a lot of inaccuracies that are in the Enochian text and the Jubilean text. Because even like if you take the Ethiopian canon, even though they've included all that time, the Ethiopian church does not have the same care for the text that the Western church has had. And so it's wildly different. A lot of even some of the New Testament books are different because they just haven't kept it as preserved as we have. So, okay. So real quick, I want to get us to a point here. It'll only take just a moment. Is real quick, this slide right here just shows the New Testament support that pulls from the Enochian account, which when I call the Enochian account, I include Jubilees. It includes that. We might come back and look at it next week, but I'm just trying to get us to a point here. But the early church fathers, this was the view they had on demons as well, and that's important. Look what Justin Martyr says. The angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by the love of women. So this is Justin Martyr, a famous church father, circa 160. And they begat children who are those who are called demons. That's the view of the early church. Athenagoras, these angels then who have fallen from heaven and haunt the air and the earth are no longer able to rise to heavenly things, and the souls of the giants, who are the demons who wander about the world, perform similar actions. So you see, that's his view. Tatian says, it is the practice of some men to capture persons and then to restore them to their friends for a ransom. Similarly, those who are considered to be gods invade the bodies of certain persons. Then they produce a sense of their presence by dreams. Then, when they have taken their fill of the things of this world, these gods command them to come forth into public. In the sight of all, then they fly away from the sick, destroying the disease which they had produced. They thereby restore men to their former state. Demons would actually, if you want to know what a sorcerer is or a magician in the Bible, it's somebody who has linked up with demons and basically is making money off of people. They're scam artists, like really good psychics in another way. So they would actually go and figure out a way to get the demon into somebody. And then when they've had their fill, the demon got what it wanted. This person would then be able to say, like, it could cast out the demon and pull the demon out and then get paid a whole bunch of money. Okay. Let's see, what else we got here? Origin. The term demons is always applied to those wicked powers who are freed from the encumbrance of a grosser body. So obviously not angels there. They lead men astray and fill them with distractions. They drag them down from God and from heavenly thoughts, the things here below. Mark Nicholas, or Felix, as often as he's called, secretly creeping into human bodies with subtlety as being spirits. They simulate diseases, alarm the minds, and wrench the limbs. They do this so that they may constrain men to worship them. By remitting them they had bound, they seem to have cured it. Origin again. Let's see. Yeah, the last origin one. Among angels, some are angels of God, and others are angels of the devil. But among demons, there is no such distinction, because he's saying they're not demons, for they are all said to be wicked. And so the early church absolutely recognized and held to the Second Temple view of demons. It wasn't until 3rd, 4th, 5th century that Christians started coming up with the idea that demons are fallen angels. And we're still suffering the consequences of their ill decisions, of the misunderstanding of the scriptures, in my opinion.